Well, thank you very much for being here. On behalf of the Alumni Association, we are just delighted at the folks that have agreed to spend a couple days with us. We really appreciate it. My name's Tracy Brala. I am from the class of 1990 and a member or a graduate of the Villanova School of Business. I'm honored to introduce our panel. We have our panel moderator, which is Dr. Emory Woodard IV, who is the Director of Graduate Studies in Communication and Associate Professor in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Right here to my right is Ms. Diana Sugg from the class of 1987, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and a freelance writer. And then we also have, to the far right, Gerald Marzorati, who graduated in 1975 and is the editor of the New York Times Magazine and assistant managing editor of the New York Times. Two housekeeping announcements are, one, I believe there was a lost beeper that has been found, so if anyone has lost that, we have it, and we can contact someone from the alumni staff and we'll make sure we get that to you. And secondly, when we actually go to the phase where we're asking questions, we ask you to use this microphone because, in fact, all of the sessions are being taped, and this way it helps us to make sure that we have clarity when the taping's finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. As you probably know from the program, I'm charged with the task of leading a discussion on a changing media and a changing world, and I have the pleasure of doing so with a truly distinguished couple of panelists. The media in the world are indeed changing. We could spend hours discussing some of the obvious changes that we're all witness to. We could talk about how media technologies have evolved, specifically the internet. We could talk about globalization and the implications that that has. But given our limited time, I think it's going to be important for us to take advantage of the expertise of our panelists and move to what I really see as the crux of the matter. The rapid changes in media technologies and our increasing globalization, I think, are just context for what I think is a more profound change. At least in America, I would argue that a more profound change in the consciousness of our culture has occurred. And it's occurred as a result of a tension between journalism as the fourth estate to preserve democracy and journalism as a business in an increasingly competitive marketplace. So when the Founding Fathers came up with this provision for a free press, they did so to ensure an unfettered flow of information with which the public could deliberate the affairs of the day. Walter Lippmann, a noted political commentator, I believe, said it best when he, and I quote, said, "The theory of the press is not that the truth will be presented completely or perfectly in any one instance, but that the truth will emerge from free discussion." And it's that free discussion that is supposed to fuel our democracy. Now, the press, however, in another sense of the word, is far from free. It is an expensive enterprise that relies heavily on the support of sponsors who may directly or indirectly influence news content. They indirectly influence content by requiring that the content appeal to the widest audiences possible. They directly influence content by frowning on stories that they dislike and encouraging certain other stories that function in their favor. The tension between the press as information provider and press as a business has, I believe, led to a jaded public. We are more cynical, we are more apathetic, we are more uninformed than perhaps we've ever been as a public. Globalization and proliferation of digital media, I think, have simply exacerbated this fundamental tension. So again, given the expertise of the distinguished panelists, what I'd like to do is to really explore this tension over the next 45 minutes or so from the vantage point of their distinguished leadership in the field of journalism. I want to pull out from them some insider perspectives so that by the end of this conversation, we can potentially identify some opportunities for leadership out of a difficult situation. So let's begin with our insider from the ground level, who has functioned as a journalist with the Baltimore Sun and is now a freelance writer. Janet, what is your sense of the tension between the press's viability as a business and its role as public informant?
Well, I thought maybe the best way to kind of summarize it for you guys is that basically I had 18 years experience in newspapers as a print reporter, and I started out like a month after graduating from Villanova at AP in Philadelphia, and quickly realized that I didn't like the sense of pushing a button and having a story go out there and not knowing who was reading it. There was no sense of community except for the janitor at the Franklin Square building and the people on the night shift at the AP. So I really found my home and kind of my heart and soul in newspapers. And from the Spartanburg Herald-Journal, which was a small morning daily in South Carolina, to the Sacramento Bee in California, to the Baltimore Sun, I got to tell you, for about those 18 years, things were fairly stable in terms of, from my viewpoint, this push and pull between the business end and our higher goals and our principles and why we're really doing the work. And the bottom line is, if you had a good story, a meaningful story, an important story, and you were at a paper with good editors, which is basically, I went to places specifically with the great editors to learn and to grow and to do good work, you could get it in the paper. Yeah, there's always issues of how much space are you going to get for your story, how much time are you going to get to report it, how many photos are going to go with your story, are they going to promote your story? But in the end, you could always get it in the newspaper. It was not an issue. The most issue that came up would be, we need more of a feel-good story. So a story about someone having quintuplets would trump a story about this kind of under-the-radar policy where hospitals were allowing family members to come back in during CPR and actually be there during the violent thumping and during a code to say goodbye, to even say, hang in there, et cetera, which was a really kind of quiet policy that has been very slowly going around the country. It took me a long time to write about. And some editors view it as depressing. And actually, they ran it small and then later, kind of apologized. So that's a business issue. We want people to be happy. We don't want to be downers. There were issues in Baltimore of how much are we going to cover urban poverty, African American troubles in the city, because that's going to become, our only theme. There's always a push and pull of that. But in the last 5 years that I was there with two things, the profits starting to go down, the readership starting to go down, the coming of the web, and the takeover of the newspaper I was on, the buyout by the Chicago Tribune. Essentially, leadership at the Tribune made decisions that they could just save a lot of money if the local newspapers ran copy from the Chicago reporters, and they just needed to cut a bunch of journalists, and when the editor of the Sun stood up to it, he was fired. And that was kind of the start of the change. At the same time, the web issue is a huge issue, I think, of leadership. So I remember being in the Baltimore Sun newsroom and waiting in a line with reporters to be able to use the six computers that actually got on the internet. Now that was probably late 90s, but still. Most reporters didn't use Palm Pilots, and I was one of those people. I was one of those people that, just as I still do today, if I have my skinny notebook and I have my pen and I have my heart and my brains, that's what I need, and I care. And I still think that's true, but there just wasn't, at least from my vantage point, and I've spoken at a lot of conferences, talked with lots of journalists, taught lots of journalists, and there's been this collision of just incredible energy, passion, people just wanting to be reporters, having great stories, and at the same time, the industry as a whole kind of seeing this thing coming and not responding very well, not investing in the web. Our web staffers were off-site in another building. They were very young. They didn't know much about journalism. We just didn't put the resources into it. So before I left, the last couple years, I've been living in Switzerland, got married, had a couple kids, and haven't been in the newsroom. But the last big piece I did, which was quite a big piece by the newspaper standards, and had great great potential for multimedia stuff. In the end, the paper said, we just don't have the resources for this. And a bunch of us basically, at the 11th hour, the photographer learned how to use the video camera, and we got these moms whose kids had died in there. We're videoing them, and I got another guy to do it free to edit these little videos, which in fact turned out quite good and were used around the country quite a bit. So I'm just giving you this sense from the inside, and I guess it's the way a lot of things in life, right? I mean, there's a train wreck coming down the track. Everyone sees it coming, everyone talks about it, but we're not acting. My father has Alzheimer's, my mother needs help, she won't get it. My siblings and I are all talking about it, there's a lot of drama, but in the end, there's not very much action. And what happened is I come back from Switzerland and the Baltimore Sun, where I worked for 10 years, the staff is less than half the size of when I was there. So from a high of about 500 to 148 people now, they're down to 2 sections. And a couple months ago, in one day, they just went through and fired the top level, all the senior editors who'd been there for years, and most of the copy desk and half of the photography department. And the people who are left are frantically trying to Twitter and blog and Facebook and everything else and take pictures and write stories. And what's happened at the Baltimore Sun is pretty similar to what's happened at a lot of newspapers, and Jerry's situation is going to be different, but a lot of newspapers around the country, and the Pew people studied this and looked at the numbers. It's about 25% of the journalism workforce is gone in the last 7, 8, 9 years. So I think 14,000 jobs gone. And I mean, in the end, it's Clay Shirky, this kind of prominent thinker on this, asked the question, do newspapers need to survive? Is that the issue? No, the issue is journalism needs to survive. So what's going to happen going forward? Going forward, how are we going to pay for it? And to me, even the bigger question is like, what is journalism going to become? Is a story always a story? Are they the same stories that I did? Does it come down to a great idea and getting on the inside and having someone look in your eyes and say, I can trust this gal and I'm gonna tell her a secret, Is that what it comes down to? Or do I just need to learn how to use a video camera and a tape recorder and be a multimedia person on top of my skills? Or do you have to think in a completely different way? This whole sense of a two-way conversation of readers out there, as in the case of, I think there's a novelist now basically writing a chapter, and then readers are saying, well, I think the plot should go this way, and this character should do this, et cetera. So a lot of big questions, and in the end, it's just so interesting to come to this conference because I'm thinking about all of it, and what we really need are leaders, because I can tell you from conferences I've spoken out across the country, and I was just speaking actually to a bunch of elementary, middle school kids outside DC, and they're sitting there and their eyes are sparkling, and they're already writing, and they already know they want to be journalists, and so there's just incredible passion and brains and everything out there, but we need the leaders who can figure out how to take us through this revolution and hold on to what's really meaningful and important. Wow. So I think I've spoken too much.
No, I think those are very intriguing insights, and I definitely do want to preserve time to engage with you during this conversation. But I want to get a different perspective. We've got the ground level perspective from a journalist. As an editor, Jerry, is your vantage point any different? Do you have a different perspective? Or are you seeing some of the same things that Diana has laid out?
Well, unemployment among journalists, I'm saying. I would break it down maybe a little differently. I don't think there's a readership crisis in America. I think, starting with your cohort, the leadership cohort, you've never been better informed than you are now. You've never had the opportunity to be as well informed. If you read the Wall Street Journal in the morning, or you read the New York Times, and you listen to NPR, or you have The Economist, or you get on your specialized websites dealing with your specialties, you've never been better informed. And there have never been more people seeking to be informed. The New York Times has 880,000 home-delivered copies every day, which is nationally a good number, but we have 22 million unique visitors globally a month. The product has never gotten to more people. We don't have a readership crisis. We have a business model crisis, which is not, which is not something that other products don't also face. Since roughly around 1920 until about 10 years ago, there was an essential agreement about how this information would get to you. Professional journalists would produce it, and advertisers wanting to reach the kinds of people who wanted to consume professional journalism agreed to advertise next to those columns of type that you got. And this was, advertisers wanted a safe environment where they thought they were getting information that was attempting to be fair and objective, and they could understand who those people would be who were consuming it. That model has disintegrated. It started essentially with Craigslist, which wiped out classified advertising in the major metropolitan newspapers. And when we really talk about the newspapers that are being battered today, they're the papers that are being battered. Smaller regional papers are actually not doing so badly. Larger national papers have had a tough couple of years, but not out of whack with everybody else's business at this point. So you had a break there. You lost classified advertising. You lost department store advertising. All these were the kind of cornerstones of metropolitan, like the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Boston Globe or the Baltimore Sun or the San Francisco Chronicle. These papers depended on these sort of anchors for advertising. That's gone, and it's not coming back. So how does that landscape get realigned? It's a tricky question. I mean, one of the things that doesn't get discussed is that the internet doesn't have a business model either. It's not that print doesn't have it. Just doesn't. Most of your kids, if you have teenage kids like my kids, spend a lot of time on YouTube, which generates a tremendous audience. They probably lost $500 million last year. There is no business model for YouTube. Advertisers don't want to be next to user-generated content and content that they don't know what it's going to turn out to be. They don't want to get next to some kid running naked down a football. That's not working. How are they going to generate money? Well, it looks like what they're going to do is try to make deals with network television to carry their television shows so that they have safe content that they can advertise next to. So now they're turning into a distribution system for existing broadcast networks. The same thing's going on Huffington Post or anything. What are they doing? They're actually distribution systems for content like the Times creates or Wall Street Journal creates by giving you a link and hoping that they can generate more people on their site than you can generate on your site. They don't have a business model. There's no one making money in the journalism business online. So we really don't know what a business model will be like. We know certain things. We know it's cheaper to produce opinion than it is to produce reporting. So that you can get people riffing and blogging for a little while, but how long are they going to do this if it's not a living? If this is going to be something they do, how many nights can they spend in their pajamas doing this before they want to actually move on to something else? There's some interesting things going on in the not-for-profit world. We just published a big piece late in August that was generated in large part by a group called ProPublica, which is a not-for-profit independent newsroom that was established with donor money. I think you're going to see these kinds of models grow up here. It's actually in England. It's between the BBC and the Guardian, which is also kind of now organized as a foundation. That might be one of the solutions. Reporting is expensive. Reporting there's just no. Reporting is a not-for-profit business essentially. all the publications. I worked for Harper's Magazine, which is organized as a foundation, and I went to work for the New Yorker, which doesn't make any money and is tucked into a company that was making money until about 18 months ago. The Wall Street Journal is now tucked into a company where they're generating profits in other sectors. It wouldn't be surprising to me if the New York Times also ended up in that kind of a situation eventually. I don't really know how long you can hold on as a family business. It's a very, our newsroom budget this year is $200 million. You have to generate a lot of revenue to be able to have $200 million worth of reporting. So that kind of journalism may actually not end up being a profitable business. But it's important to keep in mind that basically until 1920 in this country, you had a press that looked a hell of a lot more like cable television does now than the press we've had the last 40 years. You had highly partisan newspapers, either run by political parties or trade groups, crafts groups, much of from the founding of the nation until roughly around 1920. That's what the media looked like. So all this sort of screaming that you see on cable now is actually what half the history of the country was, and maybe that's what it'll be. I think that what will keep the reported vehicles going as national or global entities, things like the Wall Street Journal and the Times and whatnot, is that people like you need information to make decisions. And I think that's that a sophisticated urban capitalist culture does need a certain amount of factual information, relatively trustworthy information, in order to make business decisions. I think without that, you've got a problem. The watchdog aspect, you were talking about democracy, I think you're going to see that first in the state houses. I don't think you're going to see it in Washington. Washington is a fairly, it's true that the metropolitan papers don't have bureaus there the way they did it 10 years ago, but Washington's, there's a lot of journalists in Washington. The places I think that really are going to suffer are the Sacramentos and the state capitals. I mean, this is the place, those kind of journalists who used to just sit and read documents. And I mean, all you have to do, and look at how many governors have been jailed or threatened with jail in the last 18 months or so. State government is a problem that, and state governments are not being covered the way they once were. So, I mean, that's, and maybe when people see that and they think, well, actually, my tax dollars are going down the tubes here, we will need some kind of, it will generate some kind of energy for nonprofit entities or something, because those papers are not going to be able to do it the way that they once did. But I think that's where you'll see the first signs of, whether democracy is suffering under this new dispensation of papers going out of business.
Okay, all right. Well, there's an adage that all politics is local. All politics occur at the local level. So, I mean, I think the implications of the deficiency of coverage at the local level, has significant implications. But I want to go back to the provocative comment you made with regard to the business model crisis. I think you're on target with that comment. But I want to explore a little bit what's going to happen in the interim as we ultimately evolve to this new business model. Because we do still have print publications that rely solely on, or primarily on, circulation and subscription and advertising revenue. Yet, we know that newspaper readership is down. We know that young people are only going to the internet, that the costs, as you mentioned earlier, for the paper itself and the distribution of those physical papers is rising. Is print journalism, print newspapers going to, will that continue to survive in the interim as we evolve to this new marketplace? Or are we going to ultimately need to do away with print newspapers and move more quickly to electronic
I think
forms?
there'll be, I can speak for the Times, and again, the journalism that's reaching you will continue in print, because that upper strata of advertiser will continue to want to reach you with brand advertising. So there will be a Times version in print. We have, as I said, we have about 900,000 circulation nationally. It was a very smart move in the 90s to take what was a metropolitan paper with a scattered national readership and truly make it a national newspaper. So we're printed in 20 or 30 different cities around the country. People are paying $700 a year to have that thing home delivered. One of the beauties of modern life is that you pay on your credit card, and so you absolutely have no idea how much you're actually paying. So when we when we put through a price rise, typically, that we'd see a 10% fall off in circulation, but a 10%, but say a 10% price rise on your credit card, broken down on a monthly, you're paying $34, say, dollars instead of, or you're paying $88 instead of $86. You don't see it. So the last time we did a price rise, we had a fall off in circulation of 0.01 in circulation. So we're finding that people there's very little sensitivity to price. And so we're able to push through these price rises. So at this point, we generate a tremendous amount of revenue through circulation. That's not true of, you all probably read about Gourmet Magazine going out of business this week. Glossy magazines, their business model was we're essentially giving you the magazine, $15 a year or something like that, because all our revenue is coming from advertising. Well, that model just blew up. Mm-hmm. And so the test will be what are people really willing to pay for, and my guess is the products that you read are going to be okay. They're not going to make the profit margins they once did, and they're going to have to shave things off. But the Economist circulation, print circulation, is up in the United States about 20% over the last 2 years. The FT has a circulation that's going up in this. So you have these elite products that will continue. You also have on the bottom, you have products that will also continue, because they still have a lot of packaged good advertising that they want to reach people with. So you get Us magazine is going to be fine, People magazine is going to be fine in print, your supermarket magazines are going to be fine in print. It's that middle that actually, to get to your other point, that I think served a real democratic function, whether it's Time and Newsweek and U.S. News and World Report and print, or the broadcast news networks, network news at night, which really reached the middle class in America, and really the middle class responded by being informed by good professional journalists. That's what's going away. And I think that is a problem for this country. I mean, if you really think about that, a stable, informed middle class is what tends to actually create democracy, or keep democracies together, or keep democracies healthy. I think that's a problem, and I don't know what the answer is. Mm-hmm. There may be paid content online. I think we're struggling with this now at the Times. We're gonna, we've spent a year chewing on this question. In the end, it's going to be somebody above my pay grades gut call whether we do this or not. Mm-hmm. There's talk of a consortium. We've been in discussions with the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and a couple of other news sources about whether we could create a portal that if you wanted to get to any of us, you had to at first have a one-time subscription or something. I think there's going to be, my legal department doesn't think, but I think there's going to be questions ultimately about whether this represents some sort of collusion or not. Mm-hmm. But there isn't a silver bullet.
Okay, all right. Earlier, Diana, you seemed to suggest that print newspapers probably will go away, and your question was, well, but what happens to the journalism that remains? Does it still exist? What I'd like to engage now is a little bit of a conversation about the implications of that middle tier that Jerry just said, or perhaps a larger portion of the press enterprise going away, or at least being cut significantly. The implication is that as we continue to make deep newsroom cuts, as we continue with this cross-ownership and the implications that that has on the diversity of information that we receive, as we continue to try to reduce just the amount of coverage that a newspaper is willing to support, international or other more expensive kinds of stories. Do you think that we are getting enough information to be responsible citizens, either in the American context or perhaps now given globalization within a more global context?
Well, I agree with Jerry. I think there's more information out there than there ever was before. You can get access to a lot more. The quality is uneven. And on the plus side, while there's all this in some ways, in some of these newsrooms, it's almost kind of like devastation. I mean, it's like there's not a copy editor there who knows, how a certain street in Baltimore is spelled, and there's no kind of historical knowledge of the community in these places anymore. But at the same time that's happening, we have this kind of incredible explosion on the internet of all sorts of people, from students to lawyers to whoever, blogging, covering things. I mean, they've uncovered a lot of information. So I think the more the merrier, the more people we have out there. And there's a ton of things going on. There's the nonprofit stuff. There's this citizen thing where basically journalists can pitch an investigative idea, and the people on the website vote for who should get money to pursue their investigative idea. There's a new thing that just got announced where philanthropists gave a bunch of money in San Francisco to KQED and UC Berkeley School of Journalism, and they're going to hire some professional people to start a kind of new thing there. So there's all sorts of almost green shoots that are being thrown up, and no one knows what's going to end up to be the next Craigslist that in terms of power or influence and which one's going to work. But I can tell you what the implications are. If the Pew study is right, in the numbers of journalists gone, space gone from the newspapers, and they're in a death spiral. So people in Baltimore don't want to subscribe to the Baltimore Sun anymore. The educated people are picking up the New York Times. So the really top quality ones that are still thriving, everyone's migrating towards those and away from regional newspapers that were good at times, very good, but not a New York Times level. So what's happening is the people who used to call me, I used to pick up the phone and someone say, I'm in a nursing home and I've been, ringing a bell for, 24 hours and no one is responding, and, the guy working the night shift raped me last night. I'm 79 years old, and then it's just story after story of that. And I can't tell you, no matter, even if a lot of these newspapers, right now there's a lot of people upset about the investigative journalism, and a guy I was just talking to the other day who's very high up at NPR was saying some of that was glorified. All these newspapers weren't doing this incredible investigative work, but the threat that someone at the local newspaper would actually look into something, that at any time someone could bring an envelope, make a phone call, now do an email or send a text or whatever, and kind of drop a dime on somebody, that threat was quite powerful, even if there wasn't a Woodward and Bernstein actually in that newsroom. And the hopeful thing is that there's people out there in their pajamas staying up all night, combing through records. Was it the Talking Point? Whoever uncovered the Bush administration's firing of the attorney generals, that was some random some person sifting through this stuff and starting to see a pattern. So I think that is all great, but as someone else said, where are the editors? I mean, my husband, I was looking at something on the internet the other night. I was like, is this true? Is this a fake? Is this a hoax? What is this? And this issue of driving readers to your website, some of my colleagues in newsrooms now are saying basically, they're really hyping things. You'll do anything to get people to your website and to read your story. So at the same time, we have a proliferation of information. You know, there's this WikiLeaks.org where anyone can leak something from anywhere around the world. I mean, that's incredible. I think that stuff is incredible. But for a while at least, depending how things shake out, a lot of stories are never going to be told. I can't tell you how many great stories I never did because I could not get to them. I covered crime, I covered medicine, healthcare, and basically a lot of that stuff just had to sit there because you couldn't get to it. And there's less than half the number in the Baltimore Sun newsroom now. So now the newspaper itself isn't good. People aren't reading it anymore. So it's in a death spiral like they talk about in the insurance industry. That's what's happening. I mean, one of the probably more reasoned perspectives on what may come out of this whole thing is that a lot of newspapers, some are going to close, some will be, you know, web only 3 times a week. They'll survive, but except for, you know, New York Times, hopefully New York Times, Washington Post, and St. Pete Times are going to hang in there, but even the Washington Post, I'm hearing rumblings about things there. I mean, it's everyone is almost in jeopardy right now. As we all know, no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. But newspapers will probably go on in some sort of diminished form, and other voices are going to rise up. So the public radio stations are going to be getting a grant, I think in 10 cities, to bolster their local reporting. So like our local NPR station has hired a bunch of refugees from the Sun. And you know, some of the blogs and there's a bunch of print reporters around the country who are now starting their own news websites. The criticism of that is they're just taking their print mentality online and they're not doing it in a way that's truly really going to reach people. The sad thing for me was being like in Geneva or wherever, you know, in the middle of the night and going on the listserv for my neighborhood and realizing it was more important for me to read that than to read the Baltimore Sun. That actually people were posting, you know, somebody got mugged down the street, or I lost my kid's red shoe in the 800 block of William Street. Can someone help me? I mean, that to me was a huge missed opportunity for newspapers. Those neighborhood listservs, incredible readership, just so much that I just feel like the stuff was coming, and we just didn't, you know, we just kind of, I feel like we missed it. And now it may be too late because we could have maybe limped along, but with losing all the ad revenue, I mean, some of the newspaper stocks now are valued at like $1. I mean, and everyone's losing their jobs and they're having to either find something else or start up these websites. And someone I talked to who's knows about a lot of this stuff basically said, look, all these startups, there's not a single one that I know of that has a sustainable business model. Once they burn through their foundation money, you know, they don't know what they're going to do. I mean, unless you're like NPR and you've got your underwriters or your advertisers plus your donors, et cetera. They have kind of a good model going. And that's kind of what this whole summit comes down to, too, is leadership. Is like, who's going to be humble enough? Are the news executives now humble enough to know, you know what? We don't get this digital stuff. And this guy in the online, who's been doing the online stuff for years very successfully, said some of the now top newspaper executives are realizing, holy cow, and they're starting to micromanage the digital web aspect of their newspaper, and they're alienating their in-house experts who are 10 to 15 years ahead of them, and now they're all leaving. And I'm like, where are they going? Some are going to Google, some are going to NPR. But I mean, that's another issue of.
When does the drinking start here?
Anyway.
Another hour? 2 hours.
Well, it's different for the rest of the.
Yeah, right.
It's a different perspective for a lot of these mid-level newspapers.
You know, I've been remiss. We are about 40 minutes into our conversation, and I haven't asked for questions or comments from the group. So if you've got questions, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Bill Layton, class of '73. The business model implosion has been going on for almost 15 years now. But it seems to me there's another hidden cost to all this, which is some of the writing in those print newspapers was beautiful. And TV has ruined it all because they don't, but I mean, there are countless examples, resumes, interviews, technical writing where what you used to tell people is write it like it was a newspaper article in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. And it seems like we're at risk of losing that as a byproduct of all this.
Well, indeed, it was Neil Postman in his book Amusing Ourselves to Death who argued that one of the largest casualties of the television age has been literate society. That as a result of being trained to value entertainment above all else, we haven't done what is necessary in order to become as conversant, as literate as we possibly can. We've lost the desire to engage information that's tough, to engage information that is complex, to engage information that requires us to work, because that's counter to the television culture. So I think it's a prophecy of Neil Postman kind of coming true. But I want to hear from you.
Yeah, my wife always says I'm a glass half full person. You know, I think I hear what you're saying. I also know that there are metrics, and you know, it's the longest pieces that we publish, and some of the most difficult stuff we publish that actually gets the most page views online. You know, we get our cover stories in the magazine can run 8, 9, 10,000 words, and we'll routinely, you know, get 1 million and 1.5 million uniques over 3 or 4 days, and sometimes as many as 15 or 20 million page views. Again, I don't think it's a readership problem. I think, you know, we have more kids going to college. We have people who want to read. I don't think that. I think what we don't have is a profitable delivery system to get it to people. We haven't figured that out. And I don't. You know, I think there are, you know, tweets and there are, you know, I picked up my kid's cell phone, you know, and I look at how they're talking there. But you know, I also look at his papers and that he writes for his you know, history class, and they're different than that. That's the way he wants to talk with his buddies. But he knows it's something different when he needs to write a history report. And I don't know. I'm much more optimistic about young people and the young people I encounter than maybe other people are. I think this is they're pretty serious and engaged kids by and large, and they're volunteering, and they're interested in their traveling, and they're going abroad for a year, and they're interested in the world, and they're reading about it. And you know, there's nonfiction books, for instance. I mean, some of the best nonfiction books about Iraq and other far-flung places have been on bestseller lists over the last 7 or 8 years. I think I'm not so pessimistic about that.
Okay. All right. Well, Jerry, if I could just follow up quickly. I'm sorry, did you have a follow-up comment? Okay. I think the metrics that you shared are credible. The fact that, you know, it's you know, readership is relatively stable. But have you looked at the way in which particularly younger users are reading? Is it a much more extractive kind of reading in which it's just information seeking that actually privileges electronic databases?
There is that, but I also think narrative is a huge human impulse. Whether you take that narrative in through nonfiction prose or fiction or movie watch, I think that kind of people. You're right. There is that kind of multitasking, data mining aspect. But I think there's also, when there are real stories that people want to get to the end of, they stick around to the end. At the Democratic Convention, and it's a little off point, but at the Democratic Convention in 2000, I was at somebody's birthday party. I got seated next to David Geffen. And I asked David Geffen, I said, well, what's the media world going to look like in 10 years? You seem to make money on every aspect of the media world. Mm-hmm. And he said, sports. And I said, why sports? And he said, it's sports. I mean, he said, Murdoch's right. Whatever he's paying for the NFL, you should just pay it. It's going to pay off. It's going to pay off because no one knows the end. He says, in 10 years, you're going to be able to go on online and read the script of the TV show before you actually watch the show. You don't care. You're going to TiVo it. You're going to watch it for a little while. He says, sports, people want to know the ending. And I think a sports event is a narrative, and that people stick around from the beginning to the end of the narrative. And I think there is just a basic human impulse to do that. And I think it just comes out in different forms, whether it's a movie or a video game or prose.
There's,
Diana, you made a comment. I think you made two comments, and I'd like you to try to put them together if I heard them correctly. I think I heard you say that we the public have more access to information, more information we've ever had before. But then I thought I heard you say that we are very poorly informed today. Is that an indictment on we the public who read the journalism articles that you folks write and that we're exposed to, or did I misunderstand you?
Well, I think it's 2 points. There's a lot of information out there. Is it in context? Is it edited? Is it interpreted by someone who really knows what's going on? I think there's a ton of information, and that's really hopeful. And there's lots of experiments of different journalism models that will be on the web. You know, in 50 years, probably one of these things is going to work. But where I'm saying we're poorly informed are the many communities around the country who've lost significant amount of news hole, what they call a news hole, or space in the newspapers, reporters. That's where it's starting to, that's where we're just starting to lose lots of information and stories. At the same time that that's happening, because of the business and money problem in journalism, you've got, because of the internet, just I think a huge explosion in documents and things available for people to mine in different ways to find different things out.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, in many cases. Yeah, and in fact, some people think that a successful startup in the news business today isn't really going to be someone who's doing original reporting right off the bat, but it's going to be a website that helps you interpret this huge amount of information about the world and helps you contextualize and figure out, prioritize, and helps you kind of make sense of it. Because today there's so many stories in some ways. There's so much going on. I don't think we've ever had so much access. Do you think, Jerry? I mean, in some ways, I mean.
Link that to the poorly informed. Link that comment that you just made and Jerry's
well,
comment to being poorly informed.
When I'm talking about information, I'm talking about like if I was going to report on a story today, I would like do a Google on it first. You know, I would do on stillbirth, and I would start. You know, I would see probably the minutes from the stillbirth advocacy group. I would see what NIH is doing. You would immediately get a ton of information. Are you really getting the story? That's maybe the difference between the information and the story. So, transcripts from trials, just all this tons of stuff that's downloaded now and is put out there on the web. WikiLeaks, people are putting, something's going on in the Russian government, these documents or something about what the health department in South Africa, a change in their HIV policy. They're putting that document online, but do you sitting here, do you know what that means? And that's, in the past, what you've needed reporters to help figure out. So.
I mean, I think one of the points you were making is, does the putting information before people necessarily force them to absorb information? And I've been in this business for 30 years, and I can tell you the answer is flatly no. I mean, it's not like there weren't people writing about the housing bubble. It's not like there weren't people saying that companies were over leveraged. But you could open newspapers and magazines week after week and see that. If your 401k is returning 30% a year, you don't really want to know that there's a housing bubble, and you don't really want to know that companies are over-leveraged because it feels really good. You only want to know about it when things tank. And you know, there was a story in the Times a couple of days ago about, oh, you know, if you go buy fast food in New York now, you are presented with gigantic signs telling you all the really bad shit that is in this burger, okay? Like you can't, and how like amazing numbers of calories and no fall off in sales whatsoever, not you know, over the first 3 or 4 months. So the answer to that is no. I mean, that's just the, you know, people, it's just human nature or whatever. You can't, I mean, sometimes you nudge, the best you can hope is sometimes people, things are, obviously there's change, so things have been nudged. The world is a different place than, I was saying, you know, I came 38 years ago here as a freshman, and a lot of the world has changed in 38 years, right? I mean, it's, so obviously there's information spreads and people's minds change about all kinds of things, and slowly and on different kinds of tracks, but you know, the idea of simply the information's out there, everybody's going to be informed, there isn't, that's not true.
Yeah. So it's clearly an indictment of us who
no, I think, you know, people have lives to unfold and unspool that, you know, they're that are not simply about taking in, I'm not getting, you know, I don't wake up this morning, have a good breakfast and think, how much information can I take in today that's being produced by professional journalists? You know, I don't think I don't expect anybody can do that. Everybody's got their own lives to lead, and sometimes they take in information, and sometimes they don't. But you know, actually, you know, the election that happened last year with lots and lots of information was out there, and lots of people were engaged by it, and that's healthy. You know, I think there's a prioritizing of that. Americans have never been particularly interested in the rest of the world. They are if they're in business in the rest of the world, or they are if their son is in Afghanistan, God forbid, or they're, you know, but you know, they don't. We've never taken in a great deal of international information. That we don't. We feel far away from a lot of that kind of stuff, and you're not going to move the needle on that by publishing a lot of it. But you do anyway. But you can't expect suddenly that there's going to be massive amounts of interest in these kinds of subjects. People are interested in their own lives, and the information that you can provide them that helps. Like the Times has a parenting blog; it's very popular. There's kinds of information you can put up that's, you know, just news you can use, and people like those kinds of things, and they're going to gravitate there, and they're not going to gravitate to reading about Uzbekistan, and that's the nature of life, you know.
Right, I saw a hand right here and then over here.
This is a question.
I think we want to wait just for the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. What is the nature of participation of students in the major called communications now? Is there a different student? And you know, have the numbers dropped off? And what brave new world are you preparing them to inherit?
It's interesting. I had a bunch of comments as the earlier questions were posed that invited me to reflect on the nature of our students. But I wanted to make sure that we got your comments first before I waxed on. But since I was invited, let me first say that communication as a major here at Villanova and really across the country has been blossoming within this current environment. I think what communication provides for students is an opportunity to both receive a liberal arts education that's broadly based and prepares them to be strategic thinkers in a variety of domains, but also it provides them with an opportunity to get some vocational training to which an actual job is tied, so that they see the endpoint. If I pursue communication as a major, I can be a public relations professional. I can be a journalist. I can be, so they get the best of both worlds. They get the broad liberal arts-based education with some vocational training. In terms of the quality of the students that we've generated here at Villanova, I can not pat myself on the back, but say that we have actually turned out a high caliber of student because of the centrality of liberal arts in their education. They are strategic thinkers. They are able to engage different problems and come up with effective solutions using not only their communication expertise, but their coursework in philosophy, their coursework in ethics, their coursework in theology and religious studies. So I think we have been effective at providing an education that works well in this current economic environment. Our students write well, they speak well, but they also think well.
Hi, Carrie White, class of '86. I'm a Bostonian, so I'm fortunate enough to live in a city with 2 major dailies so far. So my question is, I wanted to follow up on Jerry's comments about the cost model, profit model of the papers. There's been no shortage of speculation about what will happen with the Globe, and there's been some wildly different financials in the last 12 months with them. So I'm curious what the panel thinks about what may come of the private equity firms who've bought stakes in some of the papers or have bought newspapers outright, and even if there's any evidence, even anecdotally, about what might happen with some of those papers?
Yeah, I don't know how much insight I can give. I mean, if they haven't loaded up the company with debt, I think you have a better shot. I mean, that's where the problem came in. But again, that's not simply a problem of newspapers. It's a problem, you know, you just had over-leveraged companies. You know, I think what might happen with the Boston Globe is that you really may get a civic-minded, the best deal would be to find a civic-minded person who's willing to settle for less than traditional profit margins. I mean, Wall Street has, you know, been punishing newspapers for a long time. There is no way quality newspapers are going to be returning profit margins over 15%. There's really no way to get there. And, you know, a civic-minded local well-to-do person who can find a way to tuck this into a more diversified business and settle for essentially doing a little bit more than breaking even, you know, which is, I think, probably what is the Washington Post model at this point. They make all of their money on Kaplan, and you know, the Washington Post does not make money, but the company, it's still a family-run company, and they're willing to run it that way. So my guess is that's kind of a best-case scenario, and it may be a similar scenario in Philadelphia in the end. You know, these are really good newspapers, and you know, I think, as I was saying earlier about state houses, I think it will be consequential if these entities just suddenly disappear. But the idea that they can become engines of profit, I think, is gone. I really think it's gone.
Yeah, what I know about that is that a guy who does he used to do business reporting at the Inquirer, and has been doing reporting for Poynter Institute, which is a journalism place that's linked with St. Petersburg. It's like a school for working journalists. Realize that there's one private equity firm and really one banker who's bought much of the debt, I believe, from Minneapolis, Philadelphia, and I think maybe, I'm trying to remember the third, it's Tribune, LA Times, Chicago Tribune, et cetera. And what that guy and that private equity firm intend or what they want to do is unclear. They haven't responded to any. But I believe they're in a little bit of a struggle right now with the guy who, in a civic-minded way, bought the Inquirer and then got him way over his head in debt. And now they own a lot of it as to who's really going to control the newspaper. And that's being fought out in the court right now. There's a civic-minded group of people in Baltimore, the Abel family, that has been trying to buy the Baltimore Sun back. They used to own it a long time ago. And so far, the Tribune's rejected their offer as too low. And, you know, essentially they've got a big, you know, we've got a big office right downtown, that there's printing presses there. About 10 years ago, they made the mistake of building a whole new plant with printing presses right in the water, or right along the bay, and the thing that was sinking. So we never moved to that newsroom, and they're printing it there now. But so it's a huge whiteout, you know. So there's just a lot of costs, and so I don't know. You know, there's questions like what it's worth. Is anyone going to buy it? I mean, some newspapers are for sale. No one wants to buy it. There's been this kind of late rush of Kerry and I think Ben Cardin, the senator in Maryland. You know, people saying should newspapers be like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and should we just, you know, there's all sorts of ideas of should it be like your cable, where you pay some monthly fee and then you have access to news on the internet, or should you make a micropayment? So Bill Marimo, the editor of the Inquirer, told me last week that they get I think 72 million page views in a year on Philly.com, their website. So if people paid a penny a page, they would get almost $9 million a year in new revenue. But there's people saying if you put up paywalls, people won't come, which I think is what you guys are wrestling with. But right now, basically, everyone is getting it for free. So
yeah, I mean, the problem
a million people are reading your story, but
you're trying to. When I say that the Times has 22 million unique visitors a month, it's probably true that about 20 million of those people are coming through search, and they're coming once. They're not going to pay to come. And if you cut them off, your advertising rate base drops from 22 million to 2 million. The people you can charge, you end up charging, it's like the airlines who charge the business traveler. You end up charging the people who actually want to use you the most, which is precarious. I mean, it's you want to chase away the people who are your most loyal users. And then what is the model? How do you go about it? I think, you know, the Financial Times has a you know, you get your first, you're metered. It's called the metered model. You get your first 20 page views for free. If you want more than 20, you're going to have to start paying. The people you can charge, you end up charging. It's like the airlines who charge the business traveler. You end up charging the people who actually want to use you the most, which is precarious. I mean, it's you want to chase away the people who are your most loyal users. And then what is the model? How do you go about it? I think, you know, the Financial Times has a you know, you get your first, you're metered. It's called the metered model. You get your first 20 page views for free. If you want more than 20, you're going to have to start paying. So there's a question of who pays, and then there's a question of what means of payment. What you find in survey after survey, people can't stand. You know, Amazon figured it out. You know, you have that one shot, you fill it out, and it's like what you do. You update your expired credit card once every 3 years. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
You never have a financial interface with them again. You just click right through to the checkout, and boom, you're gone. And you know, how can you design a way that people just don't want to be hassled with this, particularly young people? It's just like, go, I'm gone. You know, it's just like the minute they start. You know, which is the problem for Twitter, and it's the problem for Facebook, and it's the problem for YouTube. I watch the way my sons use this stuff. It's like they feel you've created a free environment here. How are you going to start getting people behaviorally to start paying for this stuff? They feel offended. Well, the way you can do it is make it kind of okay and fun, of which, you know, Steve Jobs has been the genius at. I mean, it's like, how did he figure out how you could create this object that you think is cool, and then the kids don't mind paying 99 cents for the thing? It was kind of amazing. Well, he made it feel like it was easy and cool. And, you know, God bless him, he's now working on a reader for newspapers and magazines, which I think, you know, if any company is going to come up with the device, I don't think it's going to be Kindle. I don't think it's going to, you know, toyed around with these. I don't think these things are going to generate that kind of interest. I mean, there's the iPhone, you know, which is actually pretty good. I'm on the road. I'm surprised at how much I can actually read on the thing. So, and they've worked on ones that are foldable, and I've seen some prototypes of these things, and maybe that's what happens. You have some foldable thing that actually kind of gets to be a magazine size when you open it up. But it will be some combination of the right device and it's not so much the amount somebody's going to pay, but the hassle-freeness of that payment. I think that may work.
Fantastic. We have actually gone over by a few minutes. So I think this has been a fascinating discussion, and I encourage you to continue to talk to one another about some of these issues.
On behalf of the Alumni Association, I'd love to thank you very much for a really stimulating, interesting conversation, which I think is applicable to a lot of old-time businesses that we have that really are emerging and changing in our current environment. So it really is in line with the Summit on Leadership and looking at the future and how we shape it. So thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you very much.